Not long after Robert became Chancellor in August, he asked, I think he took a look at all the things that were coming at him as Chancellor, which you would of course notice in reading the newspapers every day, and said, well, maybe he needed to think about what other things might better be led from other offices, which I think we do periodically. And so he asked my office, me as the VCA or Chief Academic Officer, to take over lead strategic planning. Not an atypical arrangement, and so that happened in a kind of early fall time frame. That coincided with the time when we needed to be developing a new strategic plan anyway. We were operating under a plan known as Achieving Our Destiny, which dates were 2010 to 2015. Which followed an earlier plan defining our destiny. I believe the dates were 2002 to 2010. So it already was, this was fall 14, these things typically take a while to get organized. So we were already kind of naturally at the point at which a new plan needed to be developed. There are a couple important externalities. First is that one of my other responsibilities is leading the campus's accreditation effort. That's moderately important because if you aren't accredited, students aren't eligible for federal financial aid. So actually it is the one thing that is absolutely vital to our operations. And we had an interim report due to WASC on March 1st. That is about to be sent around and posted for campus comments. So many of you will be getting that in a day or two because it's in, I won't want to say final draft form, but I will say reasonably close to final form, we hope. So that's due in a month, and one of the required parts of that was an essay on what had been achieved as a result of the last strategic plan and where the campus was going on strategic planning. So that's one important externality, and the next WASC visit is 2021. I like to point out, since one of our responsibilities is bragging about Manoa, is that we received a 10-year accreditation, the only institution in the state to have such an accreditation. So 2021 is the date of our next WASC accreditation. So they're asking for what's the next plan, and then in 6 years we will be asked, well, what have we accomplished as a result of that plan? So that's one important externality that's driven some of our thinking. The second is system. Robert has frequently commented that nobody quite understands the difference between the University of Hawaii and the University of Hawaii at Manoa. If you drive by H1, the freeway sign says University of Hawaii. The sports teams say University of Hawaii. And if somebody is unhappy about something that happens in sociology class, they call the president. There is widespread confusion. It is therefore, I think, a little bit odd that historically Manoa strategic plans have not actually had much relationship to system strategic plans. And so this is something that we have been endeavoring to address. System has what are called strategic directions. There's a lot of continuity between what President Lassner is saying and what President Greenwood announced. There's some flexing. It's been rethought a little bit. But the Board of Regents at their last meeting approved system strategic directions. We started the conversation when it was in about draft 14. I think the final version they approved was, I think, 23, but it is now final. It's on the website. And what I want to do basically is walk through, let me turn this thing on. This is the world's weakest laser pointer, but let's see. It's not even showing up now. Does anybody see a green dot? Well, all right. Now it's working. Okay, so what's on the left is abbreviations of the 4 system strategic directions. And so in keeping with the notion that we ought to have a Manoa strategic plan that was synced with system strategic plans, we made a first fundamental decision, and this drives a lot of this, is that we would adopt and adapt the system strategic directions for Manoa. So as much as possible to sync them from the beginning as opposed to afterwards having to say, well, what's the connection between these two things? And I think so far, I think we have accomplished a lot in that. The 4 system strategic directions are, now where'd the green dot go, is a high-performing system, HDI is short for the Hawaii Graduation Initiative. HI2 is short for the Hawaii Innovation Initiative. And 21CF is 21st Century Facilities. I keep in a Freudian slip saying 20th century facilities. That would be aspirational for some parts of campus as well, but clearly we need to aspire to be 21st century facilities. So basically we are adopting those 4 strategic directions, which are very broad, and I think at a level stated broadly, I think we all endorse them. It is to graduate more students. It is to increase our research capability. It is to improve our facilities, and it is to work well together as a system. What's the dislike about any of that? The devil will, of course, be in the details, or the God in the details, depending on who you quote. And so the second decision we made was that for each of these 4 system strategic directions, we would come up with 2 initiatives. An arbitrary number, but it's useful to be able to get the number of initiatives on at least 2 hands and not have to go down to your toes, because you can manage to do 6 or 7 or 8 things. You really can't usually manage to do 70 or 80 things. And so we attempted to try to basically crystallize a couple initiatives. What this means is there will be important things this campus is doing that are not in the strategic plan, because we're attempting to crystallize a couple key things. So the second column is basically the list of the Manoa initiatives. And I mean, I can briefly talk about those. This is essentially attempting to encapsulate some of the things we already need to be doing. So just to go down to facilities, at the bottom, there's been a lot of talk about sustainability. There's been a lot of talk about trying to upgrade our facilities. Those are 2 very obvious, very clear goals or initiatives. So we basically then started moving over. There is a column that should be between initiatives and metrics. And when I went to GSO to talk about this was a question we got from GSO, question of ASUH, where are goals? Let's say you have an initiative about improving student success. Well, how are you going to measure that, and what are the goals going to be? We want a goal set later, and I can explain why. One of the challenges the previous plan had was that it was trying to develop a lot of metrics. And so we've tried to simplify the number of metrics. So in talking about something like student success, what's the sophomore retention rate? What's the 4-year graduation rate? What's the 6-year graduation rate? These are numbers we're already collecting. So to go down to sustainability, there are lots of other things we could talk about in sustainability, but there's a nice simple measure, which is how much are we paying for our electricity. And if you manage a budget on this campus, you know that's been one of the huge challenges in terms of a sustainable budget. So to try to identify metrics that we're already using, that are meaningful, and that are fairly simple. These will evolve, but this was at least a first stab at some metrics that would indicate the kind of thing we're thinking the initiatives are going to be working on. Then I think the challenge sometimes people have is it's really easy to come up with good ideas. Who's responsible for implementing them? And so what we've tried to do is identify a lead or 2 leads. Today under essentially a recruitment admissions goal, which is number 4, we actually now finally have 3 leads. I think that's the largest number. And the idea is somebody needs to be responsible. So if we're trying to fix up our facilities, who's the major person responsible for that? All right, Steve Meter, sitting in the back, all right? Talking about graduation rates, who's the major person responsible? That's me. And so if we set some goals and we have clear metrics and we don't meet them, then we have someone who is, in a sense, responsible for meeting those goals. And in I think, previous plans, there were a lot of good ideas. They didn't necessarily tie back to someone who said, yeah, I'm responsible for this. That doesn't mean they are the only person responsible. Every single person teaching on this campus helps to contribute to student success. So there's no claim here that this is somehow unique. But nonetheless, in campuses as complex as this one, it helps to say, okay, this person is actually the person who we are going to deem as responsible for this. Then in each of these cases, we want to have what we want to call a task force. We've played with this terms a little bit. This is kind of the new term. In some of these cases, there are already existing bodies. So Steve is the chair of the Campus Facilities Planning Board that is responsible for looking at major proposals on campus buildings. We used to have a committee on enrollment planning. We've now split that into two. SURGE, which stands for Committee on Student Engagement, Retention, and Graduation, is sort of half of the Committee on Enrollment Planning. Meeting on retention and recruitment, it's been formed. We had our second meeting yesterday. Roxy Shabazz and Lori Idetta in her second day as Vice Chancellor for Students, and Christina Ani. Actually, Roxy, you're now, no, Christina's the most senior person in those roles in at 7 months or 8 months, our co-lead in terms of a series of recruitment initiatives, and that will be a new committee that is being formed. So in each of these committees, there will be, there's one exception to that we can note, but there will be representations of all the shared governance entities. There will be a Manoa Faculty Senate representative picked by the Senate. There will be a GSO rep. Our GSO rep on the Strategic Plan Committee, Jonathan was, oh, there he is, okay. There will be an ASUH rep. So each of these committees will have formal representation from the governance groups. The potential exception to that we can get to in a minute, which is the second one on the list. We sort of need to sort of think about that a little bit. But these groups will be charged for the remainder of this year, calendar year, 2015, with, okay, so here's the initiatives. This is what we're trying to do. Can you work out an action plan? And can you then come back with what we think are goals? If it's on quantifiable metrics, they ought to be quantifiable goals to create a column in between initiatives and metrics. So just to talk a little bit about graduation rates, our 6-year graduation rate is 56% now. It was 49% 5 years ago. Our 4-year graduation rate is 24.7. It was 19% 3 years ago. But our third semester retention has oscillated up and down between about 76 and 79% for the last 5 or 6 years. What are reasonable 2021 goals for these numbers? You may remember Defining Our Destiny had an awful lot of, well, let's increase by 10% every year. Some of those were innumerate. In other words, they were mathematically impossible. But in any case, that's too easy. So what actually would be a reasonable stretch goal, not a goal we know we can accomplish, but not a goal that says, wait a minute, whoever set this up must be smoking something. Right? So we need some kind of goal that's genuinely stretched, but on the other hand looks plausible for us actually to mobilize efforts. And that will be intricate. And we've gotten some questions like, why aren't you going out with goals at the present time? And I think the consensus Strategic Planning Committee is we're about a dozen people. We don't think we speak for the entire campus. There will be more like 100 people or maybe 150 people on these various task forces when they're all set up. They ought to come back with more concrete kinds of things, and then we'll have a richer basis for coming up with a reasonable set of goals. Now, I said 2021 a minute ago. Now, why did I say that? Well, there are two reasons. I go back to the two externalities. The system strategic directions are dated 2015 to 2021. So I assume there's a kind of a sense of that having roughly a 6-year time span, and 2021 is the next WASC visit. So those timetables work perfectly, and therefore we're setting this up for a 6-year time frame. The last one was 5 years, one before that was 8. You know, there's no set a perfect timetable for these things, but 2021 seemed like a reasonable basis going forward. Let me say a little bit about the process, where this conversation goes, and let me turn it over to David. We have consulted fairly broadly on campus. The Faculty Senate voted to endorse the plan at the last meeting. The GSO voted to endorse the plan at the last meeting. ASUH has come back. I've had an initial meeting with them. They came back with a number of questions. There don't seem to be any major reservations. The deans have endorsed it. The chancellor's endorsed it. So we believe by the end of this month we will have had sort of formal buy-in from the relevant bodies. I think there's some when we talked to the regents in November, December, they seemed interested in hearing about it at a meeting later this semester perhaps. So we believe we're close to basically saying we're good to go on this. This is not a strategic plan. This is a roadmap on how we're going to get to a strategic plan. And so beneath this matrix will be the various implementation plans that the work groups will come up with. They will develop it across the year, and then this will kind of, underneath this will be those plans. Once it's endorsed by the Strategic Planning Committee, some of those may go back out to governance organizations. So in a year, we will have really a highly developed concrete plan.